if you are the type of person that is motivated to solve problems by just sort of trying to figure things out, throwing stuff up against the wall, seeing what sticks, what doesn't stick, trying new things, brainstorming, just seeing all the different possibilities, then most standard time management systems are probably not going to work for you, because that's usually not how they teach time management. It doesn't mean that you don't need to manage your time, but if that's how you solve problems, trying to fit that into the box of a system is really not going to work for you.
This is Task Time Energy, the purpose-filled productivity podcast. I'm your host, Scott Miller. Welcome to the show. Welcome, everyone. Our guest today is Dr. Beth Banks Cohn, who is an accomplished organizational consultant, a senior executive coach, an entrepreneur, and thought leader with more than 25 years of success in the healthcare, pharma, biotech, IT, high-tech, retail, engineering, and manufacturing industries. Beth is regarded by many as the authority on culture, leadership, and change. She's a sought-after speaker on key aspects of executing organizational change initiatives that stick. She began her career at Johnson & Johnson, and over her 16-year tenure there, she held various positions of progressive seniority. She holds a PhD in human and organizational systems from Fielding Graduate University. And Beth has authored numerous essays and blog posts and several books. Most recently, she had an essay featured in a book titled The Secret Sauce of Leading Transformational Change. So Beth, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you, Scott, for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Excellent. I would love to know if there's anything else about your experience, your background, your education, anything else that you would like our listeners to know.
No, I mean, I have now spent more years in my own business than I did in corporate America. And so I feel like I bring both sides of that to all of the work that I do. And I love having this perspective. I love having worked inside of corporations before, and I love now being on the outside.
Yeah, that is a really, I think, beneficial perspective. What I'd love to talk with you about and hear your thoughts about is some of the attitudes or some of the things that you've observed, working in different corporations or with different corporations, some of the things you've observed surrounding time management, and especially maybe challenges that people experience with time management. Because some of what I've observed is it's almost like there are two camps. There are people who admit that it's a challenge and are looking for ways to improve. But there are also, I think, in some organizations, there's a bit of a taboo against it, right? Like if you're an individual contributor, you may not want to admit some of the challenges that you have with time management and with managing your workload because you don't want your boss to be put off by that. And I also see sometimes among leaders, there's a reluctance to talk about it because I think leaders often want to be perceived as if they totally have everything under control. And so I'm wondering if you've observed any of that or what your perspectives have been on that.
Yeah, so I certainly have observed all of that. And I think I think there is this idea in corporate America that you do have to be the type of person that seems like they're always in control, right? So that everything that you touch magically succeeds. And so I definitely see that. I think it's unhealthy. I have a lot of opinions from the mental health perspective about it, but I definitely have seen that. And I also think that there's also something that happens in corporations that people don't even really think about, which is that some things that we work on are almost like they work on themselves, right? Like we work on it, we're humming along, we're doing great, we're making great time. And then there's other things that we work on that we either procrastinate or we don't make much progress. It takes us a lot longer than the guy next to us, right, to do the exact same things. And we internalize that as a flaw in ourselves. Mm-hmm. And we think, okay, all I have to do is get a time management system and that's going to fix all my problems. And it never does. And so I think sometimes we simplify how time really plays out with people. And I have seen that a lot over and over and over again in corporations. And it's sad because people are constantly trying to fix things that probably can't be fixed instead of focusing on the things that they do really well that will give them that extra time to do the things that they don't do as well. So it's an approach, I think, to time that I've seen that I don't see too many people thinking about it enough. They just think they have to fix a problem, but really it's they need a different approach, clearly.
Yeah, there are three things specifically that you mentioned in there that are I think important to think about and explore. One is the tendency that we have to blame ourselves, to consider some of these ways we have of working as flaws, especially you also mentioned comparing ourselves to other people. So we see that other people seem to have an easy time getting these things done that I struggle with. We don't necessarily see the flip side of that, which is those other people struggle with things that we ourselves find easier or can get done more quickly. And then also you mentioned the idea of thinking that we just need a system. We just need to go buy that right book or download the right app or whatever, have the right system, and that's going to fix all our problems. I'd love to talk a little bit about your thoughts about time management systems and why they're not as successful as we would like them to be.
Okay, so first I just have to talk about one thing, which is 3 parts of the mind. So we all have 3 parts of the mind, and one of them is cognitive. We know a lot about that. One of them is affective, the feeling part of our mind. We know a lot about that. So the cognitive is where our skills, knowledge, and education sits. The affective is where our feelings, our preferences, our motivation sit. But there's this third part of the mind that we don't talk about, which is our instincts. It's called the conative part of the mind, or the doing part of the mind. We've known about this since Aristotle, because he wrote about it. It's that third part of the mind that often is the reason why these systems don't work, because they do work for some people, but they don't work for everybody. And so you have to find the one that works for you. So if you've tried a few and none of them have worked, maybe you need a different one. Or maybe you need to really think about, what is it about this task that goes against my instincts that I'm having a hard time managing? So for example, if I'm the type of person that in order for me to really be able to get work done, I have to have a plan first, then I need to have a plan, right? But if my boss says to me, oh, you don't need a plan, just do this. But when I start doing it, I really am having a hard time and it's taking me a really long time because I don't have a plan. Then you need to have a system that starts off every time with you creating a plan. If you are the type of person that is motivated to solve problems by just sort of trying to figure things out, throwing stuff up against the wall, seeing what sticks, what doesn't stick, trying new things, brainstorming, just seeing all the different possibilities, then most standard time management systems are probably not going to work for you, because that's usually not how they teach time management. It doesn't mean that you don't need to manage your time, but if that's how you solve problems, trying to fit that into the box of a system is really not going to work for you. So I think it's really finding the system that works for you and really understanding sort of why you need a system in the first place. If you need a system in the first place because half of your job is something that takes you a really long time to do because it goes against your instincts, then you need to think about that, not think about, oh, I just need a system will fix it. Or if you need to do something in your job that you don't know how to do, you get the skills for that. But if you need to do something in your job that goes against the way you normally or naturally operate, then you need to think about what are the skills you need to learn in order for you to be able to work within that system that you're trying to work with, right? And then so it's not like how you naturally do things, it's a skill you'll learn, but then again, you need to learn those skills. So it goes back to the cognitive part of the mind. And then sometimes we're just not motivated, right? So if there's no motivation, if you're, part of your job is just this kind of thing where you just have no motivation to do it for whatever reason, you need to think about why you're not motivated about it and get to the root cause. And I think that's what my message is for everything. Get to the root cause of why you're thinking about that you need a time management system to begin with. And then maybe you do, and maybe you don't.
Yeah, that why is such an important aspect of it and often overlooked. And understanding our natural tendencies, and I mean, there's so much in there that I think is so important to consider. One is just the simple idea that our brains work a little differently. And what works for one person may not work for everyone. And that's something that I see with certain time management systems, the way they're promoted, sometimes by the creators. Sometimes you have people who have successfully used a certain time management system, and they're going around telling everyone, hey, this is the way to do it. Instead of saying, well, this is great for some people and may very well be worth trying, but don't be surprised if it doesn't work for you. That's okay. It just, it's an experiment. That's often how I talk about time management with people is it's if you're trying to make some changes in your life, it's an experiment. And the more you look at it that way, try something, give it a fair try. Don't just try it for 30 seconds and give up and say, no, this doesn't work. Give it a fair try, really see how it works, but be willing to say, okay, this isn't the solution for me. It seems very, very important for a lot of people.
I think it's really critical. I mean, I remember all of the time management systems that I was sort of handed when I worked in corporate America. And it almost seemed like every year they had a different flavor. But one of the things that I found is that really none of those systems worked for me because it's not how I solve problems and it's not how I approach work. And so I needed to create something for myself that worked for me. And some of it had to do with really being really clear about deadlines. Like one of the ways that I approach it is I approach solving problems by when it's due. Now, not everybody does that, but I do it. And so I had to find a system that's what it was based on. It's based on, okay, this is due, so you have to do this first. Then this is due, so you do that second. And not everybody works that way, but I knew
Right.
that that's how I worked. And the same thing with working with really our approach to time as well. Like some people have to have deadlines. Some people fall apart when there's a deadline. Some people need lots of lead time. Some people don't need any lead time. Some people can have lots of things going at once. Some people work best when they have one thing going on and they finish it and they move it on to the next thing. And so you have to know that about yourself. But there's another component that gets layered on all of this, which is your company is telling you what to do. Right? They're telling you have to manage your time. Your manager is saying, well, I manage my time this way. That's how you should manage your time. And I can't even count on one hand. It's probably more two hands and my feet. The times people have said to me, well, you have to do it this way because this is how I do it. And it works for me.
Right.
And managers need to realize that they need to back off a little bit and let somebody else figure it out for themselves and figure out the system that works best for them instead of dictating it. So you not only have sort of the way you naturally work very productively, but then you have your organization putting on top of you the flavor of the month. I mean, I worked in a company that every couple of years we had a different time management system seminar that we had to go through. And it's all good information, but it doesn't mean that it works for me.
And there's also an aspect of that of whether, you mentioned going to a seminar, like whether there's really effective training happening, because it's very easy for a manager to hand someone a book and say, oh, here's this great book on time management. Or I remember once I had a boss who was overall a great boss, but they handed me like this sheet on this time management system. It was just a one-page sheet. And I looked at it and went, oh, this looks interesting. And I sat it over on my desk and it just sat there. So if there's no follow-up, if there's no actual coaching or training, teaching is just not is more than just handing someone a book. Teaching is more than just handing someone a sheet of paper. There has to be a little bit of an ongoing process, even if a system is going to have any hope of working. And definitely recognizing that what worked for me as a leader is not necessarily going to work for everyone on my team. And it sounds complicated. I think it sounds very complicated and maybe a little bit overwhelming for a leader to say, well, wait a minute, I have this, 10 people reporting to me, and I have to figure out how each individual one of them works differently. What would you say to someone who feels a little bit overwhelmed by that as a leader?
Well, first of all, it's not their job to figure it out. It's their employees' job to figure it out. It's their job to support their employees figuring it out. I guess maybe, I don't know, maybe I have a different experience in life that brought me to this, but by the time I got into a company, I had been in college. I had to manage my time in college. I had to, I worked at jobs, odd jobs, I had to, during the summer, I had to figure out how to get the tasks done while I was working. And I pretty much knew how to do stuff and how to manage my time when I got to work. But what I needed to further enhance is when things got tough, what do I do, or how do I do it? Like, what's going to work for me? And that's where me knowing that I needed specific deadlines worked. But then it's my job to ask for them, right? So if my boss says, well, this year you're going to work on this project, and doesn't give me a date or anything like that, if I know that I need a date in order to know when I need to start working on it, then I have to ask for the date. And it's his job to say to me, this is the date, or I don't know, let's talk about it next month, and then I'll pick a date. And so I just put that away because I'm definitely not going to work on it until I have a date. But it's not their job to say, get working on it now, I'll give you the date later. Like, it's their job to say, I'll let you know when it's due. And then as long as you get it in by the time it's due, we're good. I mean, listen, you always have to figure out who works for you, mostly because you have to figure out how to motivate them and what's important to them and those kinds of things. But that's with any relationship. Okay, so you have 10 relationships that you get paid to create in your company. And so that's your job, right? So that's what you do. And you figure things out along the way. But it's not only the manager's job. It's the employee's job to ask for what they need. And if they're not asking for what they need, then it's the manager's job to help them talk about why they're not asking for what they need. Like, why didn't you ask me for the due date if that's what you needed to really figure out when to start working? Like, why didn't you ask me for more time when you needed it because you ran into this roadblock? Why didn't you ask me for help to get you through that roadblock when you were working on this problem? Like, to me, those are the kinds of conversations that a manager needs to have with their employees. But figuring it out so that they can tell the employee how to manage their time better, that's not their job. That's the employee's job.
Yeah. And that seems to be, again, something that leaders struggle with. I mean, I guess it depends on what type of training the person has had as a leader, what type of philosophies they've been exposed to. But from what I read and see and hear, there do seem to be a lot of leaders out there who believe that their job is to figure things out and then tell the people on their team what to do, instead of looking at it as, you know, the responsibility of a leader is to empower the people on their team and say, here's what I need you to do. You need to figure out how to do it. And you need to come tell me what you need help with. And then I will support you in those ways that you need. But it really is a matter of empowering the individual contributors, empowering the people who or the other leaders who report to you, depending on, you know, what your job is, empowering those people to, like you said, figure things out for themselves with the support that they need to do that successfully. Do you feel like there's more of a shift towards that type of leadership happening, or are people still stuck in a little bit of the older ways of thinking about being a leader, the more dictatorial ways?
Yeah. So here's the thing about empowerment. It's more work, right? It's more work for everybody. As an employee, I have to figure it out. As a manager, I have to let you figure it out. And there's more worry because maybe you'll figure it out and maybe you won't. And then what am I going to do? And how am I going to know? Right. So there's a lot more unknowns. It's much easier to do the command and control thing. And listen, I came out of Johnson & Johnson, when I was there in the 80s and 90s, in the early 2000s, sort of the bastion of military thinking. Mm-hmm. But still, like, we've been using that word empower for a long time. But I really don't think that we understand what it means, because it's not that we're saying to someone, here's the task, go figure it out. It's more letting them complete the task in a way that makes sense for them and not getting involved in the how, and just setting the what. And then, to your point, helping them along the way if they need help, but employees needing to ask for it. But it is more work. Like, as a manager, if you're stressed for time, you just want to tell people what to do so that you know that they're going to do it, and you've given them the deadline, you told them how to do it, and now they're just going to do it. It's much easier. Mm-hmm. You don't have to worry about what motivates them. You don't have to. You just have to worry that they're going to do the work. So empowerment's hard, and it takes more than just giving orders, and it takes time, and not everybody has the capacity to do that, and not everybody wants to do it. You just want people to get to work and do what they want them to do.
Yeah. And I wonder how much it is, like, we're talking about people having different, it's that conative aspect of it. Some people seem to be more instinctually relationship builders. right? They're the ones that want to get in there and get to know the people who are working with them and build a relationship. Other people are more the maybe task oriented, results oriented, who are just going to say, here's what I need you to do. Here's how I need you to do it. And again, stepping back, for leaders, stepping back and understanding themselves a little better seems important when we talk about building, the importance of building relationships this way.
Yes. And there are people who are naturally task oriented. Like when they look at something, a project, they're going to look at it through the eyes of the tasks. And then there's people who look at that same project through the eyes of the people that are going to work on it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so critical for you to know that about yourself and to know that not everybody's like you.
Yeah.
Because if you're task oriented, but you manage a team of people where half of them are task oriented and half of them are people oriented, they can still all get the work done, but how they do it is going to look different. And you have to be okay with that. Even though you're in your task orientation, you may have a way that you want them to do it. But as a people manager, you need to let go of that how and really just focus on the what, because it's the what that you pay people for, and it's the what that you reward people for. And it goes back to, one of the things that I think is so critical in society today, especially in America and in American business, is there are a lot of people in people management in American businesses today that should not be managing people. And we still, in general, promote people that shouldn't be people managers into people managers. And if corporate America wants to solve a lot of the ills that they have around motivation and productivity and people leaving and not being, people retiring in place or whatever they're calling it, quiet quitting. I mean, I think if you can solve a lot of these problems if you focus on creating amazing people managers, because you can tie every single one of those issues back to that. And time management is one of them, a really important one of them, because people who are just told what to do, if they're thinking people are gonna say, you know what, you can't pay me enough. I want to go someplace where I have a little bit more freedom to be creative and to bring my whole self and my full self to work, not just to be a cog in your wheel. Nobody wants to be a cog in your wheel. That's been over for a long time, but corporate America doesn't seem to see that so much.
Which is a whole very interesting topic. The idea that in some organizations, or I'd say in many organizations, the way to progress in your career is to get promoted into a leadership position, into a management position. And I think I agree 100% that there are people who maybe would be really happy or more happy just being an individual contributor. And yet there's no path to greater financial reward or whatever it is they're looking for. There's no path to that unless they become a people manager when they really don't necessarily want to or aren't as happy in that role. I mean, what do you think is the solution to that? Can we train those people to be better managers and better at understanding, better at building relationships and providing the people they lead with what they need? Or is it just some people aren't meant for that?
Well, I do believe that some people just aren't meant for it, but I do think also that people can learn. Some of it won't come naturally to everybody, right? So some people in the world are naturally empathetic, but you can learn to be empathetic, even if it's not something that comes naturally. If you just, obviously keep reminding yourself to use your empathy skills when you're dealing with issues with people that report to you. I think we can teach a lot of it, but I think we can also hold people accountable for making sure that they learn it and that they use it, right? You can sort of talk about it, but doing it is really important as well, right? So holding people accountable for being great people managers and not just saying, well, you managed 10 people. Did you do their performance reviews? Okay, you're a great people manager. It actually doesn't work like that. And so companies holding people accountable for that. And then when they see them falling down, coaching them and making sure that they understand that what they're doing is really not going to be productive in the long run. And it all takes work. And you have to be willing at higher levels to do that work with the people that report to you. Not everybody wants to do that work. And by the way, there are plenty of companies that do it well. Not everybody's terrible at it, but there's enough terrible people managers in the world that are in that track, to your point, because they don't have any other way to make more money.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have to get out of the individual contributor and become a people manager. Listen, I've worked for managers who don't really like people.
Yeah. which is
I don't know.
not an ideal, not ideal situation.
No.
And it's interesting because I'll often say to people when we talk about this topic of, where the only path forward if you want to make more money is to become a manager, I'll sometimes say, like, let's say you have this really rare antique car that was given to you by a beloved relative, and that car needs to be repaired. Who do you want repairing it? Do you want the person who's been repairing that type of car for 20 years, or do you want the person who's been repairing cars for 2 years? Right. So there's value in letting somebody stay in a role and get really, really good at doing that job and get really proficient at it and rewarding them appropriately for how well they do that job. And it seems like there's not as many opportunities for that as there could be in a lot of organizations.
Yes. I mean, there is sort of that individual contributor track, and then there's the management track like that. That's sort of been the traditional two ways of thinking about it. But I actually think that there needs to be like a third way, which is remaining an individual contributor, but being seen in the organization as somebody that can get lots of special assignments, right? Get put on cross-functional teams, get traded for 6 months to work in another part of the business, and then come back and trade back and go to a different place, to be a floater, not necessarily have to stay in one place, and be rewarded for that in the same kind of ways that you would reward somebody who now manages people. Because I think organizations have not really used a lot of creativity around that. And they also, in the ones that I've seen try it, they also don't go far enough, right? Because they say, well, you can take that transfer over there, but there's no guarantee that you're ever going to get back to where you need to be. Like there's no sort of path to follow. It's almost like a leap of faith, and not everybody's going to take that, right? Because they still need to bring home a paycheck, and they're in that job because they like that job. So I think organizations need to be a little bit more creative about how they think about it, and they need to have a 21st century solution to a 21st century problem, which is that we're still promoting people into management that don't want to really be managers and aren't that interested in being managers. And we need to find a way to utilize what they're great at in a way that rewards them in ways that makes them continue to feel motivated and interested in doing their best for the company. And take the people who are really interested in being people managers and let them fly, let them be great people managers, give them the support that they need to be great people managers, and find a way to assess people that way. I recently worked with a company where they do that assessment. It's fascinating. And it's an endless process, but they're so committed to it. And if it takes 6 months to find the next manager, that's what they're going to take. Now, they try to do it so there's always a pipeline, right? But they put you through so many different ways of talking about and thinking about being a people manager. They really do put the right people in those people manager jobs, but they're committed to the time it takes. And it takes everybody's time because everybody participates, from the very highest person in the company to people that are sort of high level technical people, because they really want everybody to have a hand in the process. It's great when it works.
All of this ties in so well. I think there's just that one thing you said, which is finding ways to allow people to do the work that they love to do. Right. And sometimes that means challenging people. Sometimes that means pushing people out of their comfort zone. There is room there, I think, to challenge people and push people in directions that they might not immediately gravitate to, but really finding ways to let people do the work that they do well and enjoy doing. There are benefits for that in terms of productivity. And also a lot of the things that companies really want, like engagement and loyalty, and these things that we would love to have from the people who are working for us. I mean, this is a really good way to get that, rather than funneling people into roles that they don't necessarily want to be in just because that's the only way they can make more money doing what they do.
Yeah. And I mean, doing people a disservice by putting them in those roles.
Yeah. What about creating opportunities for people who might want to be people leaders, might want to be people managers, but they haven't learned certain skills or certain ways of communicating, certain ways of working that would allow them to be good at that will allow them to do that well? How much opportunity do you think there is there?
Yeah, not as much as there should be, right? Because I can't even tell you the number of times I've talked to managers who said to me, well, they put me in this role, but I've never gotten any training.
Right.
And I think, okay, well, some things I understand that you don't need training for some things, but to give people sort of even the context of sort of where you fit as a people manager and what your role is to the success of the organization through other people. And to even just give you that, like talk with the leaders of your company about their philosophy towards people management. Getting the context, I think, is so critical. I pretty much never see that happening. And then really challenging people managers to not just learn about people management, but to learn about themselves. One of the things that I created in the past is a course on authentic leadership, because I feel like being an authentic leader, the only path to that, in my opinion, is by being a really great people manager first. And not to say that individual contributors can't be leaders in the organization, but what you learn as a people manager is critical for how you lead an organization, because it gives you an understanding and a feel for how organizations work, because they work one person at a time. And so if you're just an individual contributor and you never have to worry about motivating anybody, and you never have to worry about when somebody's having a bad day or how to get the work done when somebody's sick or any of those things, then you really don't get an appreciation for the people side of your business. And so I think even individual contributors can have that experience by being team leaders, being put in charge of a project, being a project leader for a project where they have to deal with all these different things, even if it's only for a short period of time as an individual contributor, and then go back to the way that they were. But the path to great leadership is to understanding the people side of your business and being that authentic leader, somebody who brings their authentic self to work, I think is critical. I think it's critical for all employees, but for leaders especially. They really need to explore sort of what makes me tick. What are my values? Why do I think this way? Do I think everybody should think this way? Like, am I people oriented? Am I task oriented? And to really explore how all of that plays out and what they can fix about that if it needs to be fixed, and what they can't, but then they need to learn something else or do something else to compensate for it. And I don't think we do that at all in companies. We just put people in management positions and expect that they're going to learn. I don't know how, osmosis maybe, but
yeah, there seems to be a real opportunity there. There's that point between showing potential to be a good leader and actually being in a leadership position, because I think people I've seen myself being put into leadership positions, I think because of this, people who take responsibility for themselves and are able to work without a lot of adult. I always say, like, a lot of the jobs I've had a lot of responsibility and very little adult supervision. So I was basically like, I'd talk to my boss every once in a while and they'd say, like, okay, here's what you need to do. Everything good? And I would say, yep, everything's good. And then I would go and do the work. And I think when you're responsible like that, and then also there may be these opportunities, these short-term opportunities to lead a team or lead a project where you show some ability to do that. But that's not the same as being in a job where, 80% of your responsibility is leading other people. That's a big shift. And it seems like there are some great opportunities to provide some of this coaching and training and knowledge that you're talking about that would help people bridge that gap. And that's simply the part that we're not really doing. And if we did that, we would have more productive and effective leaders leading more productive and effective teams.
Oh, yes, I totally agree. And I think you brought up a really important word, which is coaching, because I think that sometimes we think, we're just going to send people out to a training class and they come back and everything's going to be great. But studies have shown that if you invest in coaching your people, you will get a greater return on that investment, because having somebody work with an individual for 6 months or a year really helps them make the changes and then reinforce those changes, whatever they happen to be. And it gives them a way to have access to different thought processes than they wouldn't have been able to have before. And it helps them have somebody in real time really help them through some difficult issues that they've never faced before. And so I think organizations that invest in coaching, and in my opinion, should be coaching at all levels, but let's just say even just managers and above, an organization that invests in that for their managers and leaders above that, I think really gets a huge return on that investment, because they are ensuring that people have that real-time access to the learning opportunities and how to take something that's going on and turn it into a learning opportunity that they wouldn't ordinarily have if they had just gone to a training class, or even if just their manager is coaching them. Like, I'm not saying that we shouldn't expect our managers to be coaches, or directors or vice presidents, or whatever, to be coaches. I think we should, but I think we also need to give them a coach so that they have somebody to talk to as well, that it's not just a one-way street. It needs to be a two-way street in that regard.
Yeah, very much. And you talked about return on investment. And I think that's a really interesting facet for organizations to consider, because, and I've just, a couple things came to mind as you were talking about this. Like, it makes sense when we look at it in certain ways. Like, if I go to I'm going to think of a language, like I don't speak French, right? So if I go to a weekend long, fully immersive French language seminar, right? It's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I might walk out of there maybe knowing how to carry on a very simple conversation in French. Where is the restaurant? I would like a glass of wine, whatever. But if I don't practice or get any additional training for another 6 months, like 6 months later, or even a month later, I'm not going to remember any of that. It's very different if it's like a weekly 1 hour French language, having conversation or French language class. That's two totally different things. And I think because organizations are very often full of people who are already kind of stretched thin and have a lot of responsibilities, maybe a little overwhelmed, it seems like a lot of organizations are reluctant. Like, they want the 2 hour training session, teach the people what they need to know, and then there's the idea that that will be enough to have people actually act on it, when it's really not. And when we talk about more long-term, actually effective training, effective coaching, the kind of training that's going to involve that follow-up and produce results, companies aren't always willing, or don't always consider that actually is the better investment.
Yes, it is unfortunate, because they have a training budget, and they just want to use the money in the training budget, and they don't think about it as a learning budget, right? If it's a training budget, I'm going to pay for training. If it's a learning budget, how I get people to learn can look really different. And to me, that's where the coaching comes in. And when I worked inside of a company, I was so lucky to be able to have that opportunity to have a coach a couple of times. And I have to say, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it really allowed me to make the changes that I wanted to make, that I needed to make, with somebody who was there with me every step of the way. Right? Because my boss is definitely too busy, right? Because they had 9 other people that they were managing. They didn't have time to meet with me every week for an hour, and they didn't have time for me to like recount things. And they had skin in the game. So they shouldn't have been my coach on that in these things anyway, right? Because they wanted me to get to a certain point, and to go back to what we talked about before, like, they wanted me to get there in a certain way. But my coach just let me get there in my way. That to me was an investment the company made that honestly made me more loyal than anything else, because it was something that they really invested in me. And listen, J&J paid for 2 master's degrees and a doctorate for me, and which was an amazing thing. But it was the coaching that they gave me that really solidified my allegiance to them, and how hard I worked for them. Like, I worked really hard for them. It was a great relationship. They paid for a lot of things, and I worked really hard for them. So we both got out with really positive results. But it was that coaching, and companies are so short-sighted about that, and they think that it's a luxury. And in this day and age, it's not a luxury anymore. Maybe it was 15, 20 years ago, but it's not a luxury anymore. It's a necessity. And it frankly should be something that every manager gets in their first year of management.
I love that shift you made, that term you used, learning budget. Like, just that shift in thinking from calling it a training budget to calling it a learning budget could really make a difference for some people. And being aware of the potential return on the investment, like you're saying, when you invest in people in that way, the benefits you're going to get in their loyalty, in their engagement, in their appreciation for the job, and in their productivity overall. Beth, I want to be respectful of your time and respectful for our listeners' time. I have one question that I like to ask every guest at the end of this podcast, and that is, what is your dream right now?
Well, from a professional perspective, my dream for the next 4 to 5 years is to really spread the word about expanding our thinking about how change happens in organizations. And my dream would be to get calls from CEOs all around the world that want me to come and talk to their teams, and in turn have me talk to the teams of their teams, and really begin to change the way people think about things, because we can't go on the way we've been going on. I think the pandemic taught us that, but I don't think we know where to go. And I think I have an answer. And I think I don't say that it's the answer, but I think I have an answer. And my dream would be that my phone would be ringing a lot, so that people could bring me in and experience a little time with me and change the way that they view the world.
That's fantastic. I hope that dream becomes reality for you.
Thank you. Me too.
If people want to get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Well, they can email me. My email is beth@adrachange.com. That's ADRA change.com. And I'm always happy to get emails. And you can find me on LinkedIn with my full name, Beth Banks Cohn.
Okay, excellent. I will include links in the description for this episode too, so that people can find the links there to get in touch with you. Yeah, thank you for joining us today. Thanks for all your insights. I think people are going to enjoy hearing this.
I hope so. And I hope that your listeners learn something. And I know I learned something just talking to you. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Scott.
I hope that you'll check out Beth's website and or look her up on LinkedIn. Again, you can find those links in the description for this episode. And if you're interested in the one-on-one coaching and team coaching that I provide, check out my website, scottmillercoaching.com. Thanks for listening today.